They said the mirror revealed the truth. But when Elias Marlowe brought it home, it showed something else, faces of people who would soon die. Each reflection became a warning and then a curse. As the line between reality and reflection fades, Elias discovers that some mirrors don't just show your image, they decide your fate. This is beneath the skin of the mirror, where every face in the glass is a countdown and the final reflection may be his own. Elias Marlowe had always been drawn to things past their time, the weathered, the forgotten, the curious antiques that whispered stories of lives long gone. On a rain-soaked afternoon, he found himself wandering down a narrow, cobblestone street he had never noticed before, as if guided by some unseen force. There, tucked between a shuttered bakery and a faded bookstore, stood a small, unassuming shop with a faded sign that read simply, "Antiquities." The shop's window was a cluttered mosaic of old clocks, tarnished silverware, and, most prominently, mirrors of every shape and size. Their glass caught the weak daylight, fracturing it into shards of dim reflections that played tricks on the eyes. Elias felt a familiar pull, the quiet pulse of discovery stirring beneath his ribs. He pushed open the door, the bell overhead tinkling softly, and stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and dust, an aroma both comforting and unsettling. Rows upon rows of mirrors lined the walls, their frames carved with intricate patterns, twisting vines, snarling cherubs, and delicate filigree that seemed to writhe beneath the touch. Elias's footsteps echoed softly as he moved deeper into the shop. The light was dim, filtering through grimy windows and bouncing off countless reflective surfaces, creating an almost kaleidoscopic effect. He caught sight of the shopkeeper, only after a moment, a woman standing behind a cluttered counter, her dark eyes watching him with a steady, unreadable gaze. "Looking for anything in particular?" she asked, voice low and smooth like aged velvet. "Mirrors," Elias replied, "something unique." She nodded slowly as if she'd expected this answer. From beneath the counter, she produced a mirror unlike any other, a tall, ornate frame of burnished silver, curling into elaborate floral motifs that seemed to shimmer despite the dull light. The glass itself was flawless, reflecting Elias's figure with startling clarity. "This mirror," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "is said to reveal one's true self." Elias's fingers traced the delicate carvings, feeling a subtle warmth emanate from the frame. "How much for you?" she said. "A fair price. But be warned that which is reflected may not always be what you desire to see." He smiled faintly, brushing off the warning like a shadow at dusk. "I'll take it." The transaction was swift, and Elias left the shop clutching the mirror, its weight solid and strange in his hands. The streets outside were slick with rain, the sky a heavy gray canvas. Back in his cramped apartment, he set the mirror against the wall, adjusting the angle until the faint glow of the street lamp outside caught the glass. At first, the reflection was as expected, a pale, gaunt man with sharp features and deep-set eyes that betrayed restless nights and quiet obsessions. But then, the image shifted, and Elias blinked in disbelief. The face staring back was not his own. It was a stranger, a man with hollow, sunken eyes and a mouth drawn tight in a grimace that seemed to speak of unspeakable fear. The reflection was disturbingly real, like a window into another's nightmare. Elias reached out instinctively, fingertips brushing the cold glass. The stranger's eyes seemed to flicker, a subtle twitch of recognition, or was it a warning? The room grew colder, the silence pressing in like a living thing. Night deepened around him, the city's distant sounds muffled beneath the heavy cloak of darkness. Elias's mind raced, caught between fascination and a rising tide of dread. What was this mirror? What truth did it hold beneath its polished surface? He sat back, heart pounding, unable to tear his gaze away as the stranger's face flickered again, then faded into the blackness of the glass. Outside, the rain continued its steady patter against the window pane, as if the world itself held its breath. And somewhere, in the quiet depths of the night, the mirror waited. The night had settled over the city like a thick, suffocating shroud, the antique shop silent except for the soft ticking of an ancient clock mounted on the wall. Elias Marlowe sat hunched before the mirror he had acquired just days before, a piece so ornate it seemed almost alive, its gilded frame curling with strange, twisting motifs that whispered of forgotten sorcery. The air in the room was heavy, charged with a tension Elias could not explain, as if the mirror itself breathed beneath the surface. His eyes, dark and hollow from sleepless nights, were fixed on the glass. He expected to see his own reflection, the pale, gaunt face that had become a permanent fixture in the mirror's world. But tonight, the image shifted. The surface rippled like disturbed water, and the familiar visage dissolved into that of a man Elias knew. It was Thomas Larkin, a colleague from a few years past, a man whose smile had once been warm, but now seemed frozen in a grim mask of despair. Elias's heart quickened as he stared, his breath hitching. The reflection was not static. Thomas's eyes flickered with a strange intensity, as if pleading for some salvation Elias could not provide. The candlelight flickered beside him, casting grotesque shadows across the walls, and the mirror's surface shimmered once more. The room felt colder, as if the very essence of death had seeped in through the glass. Elias forced himself to look away, pressing his palms against the rough wood of the table. "This can't be," he muttered under his breath. "It's just a trick of the light." But the unease gnawing at his mind would not relent. The following morning, news arrived with a sharp sting. Thomas Larkin had been found dead under mysterious circumstances, the cause unexplained but sudden. The report was brief, clinical, but the impact on Elias was seismic. Sitting alone in his study, surrounded by relics and the faint smell of dust and old paper, Elias listened to the crackling radio broadcasting the news bulletin. Each word was a hammer blow to his nerves. The realization settled in like ice. The mirror did not reveal the true self. It revealed the next to die. Desperation clawed at him as he rifled through old photographs, news clippings, and his own hastily scribbled notes. He compared each face to the mirror's shifting surface, searching for a pattern, a way to break the cycle. The faces were always strangers, acquaintances, people he knew, people who vanished from the world with a suddenness that left no room for warning. But what could he do? How could he warn them? And would his warnings change anything, or merely hasten the inevitable? The mirror sat silently in the corner, its glass unnervingly still now, reflecting only the dim light of the room. Yet Elias knew better. Death lurked beneath that surface, waiting to claim its next victim. Night after night, he returned to the mirror, compelled by a force he could neither name nor resist. Each viewing deepened his dread, each reflection a step closer to a fate he could not escape. As he stared into the glass, the boundary between present and future, reflection and reality, began to fray. The mirror's secret was no longer a whisper, but a roar in his mind, a terrible truth he could neither accept nor deny. And somewhere in the shadows, the mirror waited, patient and unyielding, for the next face to appear beneath its skin. The night was heavy with a silence that pressed against the walls of Elias Marlowe's study, broken only by the soft tapping of rain against the window panes. He sat motionless, the ornate mirror leaning precariously against the far wall, its surface catching the dim glow of the solitary lamp. At first glance, it was a beautiful artifact, intricately carved wood, delicate etchings curling along the frame like twisting vines. But tonight the mirror was no mere decoration. It was a portal to a dread far deeper than any antique curiosity. Elias's eyes were fixed on the glass, where a face had appeared, one that was not his own. The pale visage of a man he recognized flickered there, as if trapped beneath the surface, frozen in a moment yet to come. There was something unsettling about the stillness, something unnatural in the way the reflection did not mimic his movements, but held a silent, ominous promise. He swallowed hard, the dry air in his throat thickening with fear. The face belonged to Jonathan Harker, an acquaintance had seen only a handful of times, a man whose life had seemed ordinary and unremarkable until now. Elias's mind raced, the weight of realization dawning like a cold shadow creeping up his spine. This was not a mirror showing the present self, but a grim oracle reflecting the next death. Unable to shake the mounting dread, Elias reached for the phone with trembling hands. The receiver felt heavy, foreign, as if the act of dialing might tether him irreversibly to the curse the mirror bore. He found Jonathan's number scrawled on a scrap of paper from a chance meeting months before, and hesitated only briefly before pressing the buttons. The phone rang once, twice. Elias's heart pounded so loud he feared it might betray him. When Jonathan finally answered, his voice was casual, unaware of the terror that gripped the other end. "Jonathan, it's Elias," he said, voice strained but urgent. "Listen, I need you to be careful. There's something terrible coming." A pause. Jonathan's tone shifted to cautious skepticism. "Elias, what are you talking about? You sound off. Maybe you should rest, please," Elias pressed, desperation lacing his words. "I saw something in the mirror, your reflection. It's not normal. I think you're in danger." Jonathan sighed, voice softening but still unsure. "Elias, I appreciate the concern, but I can't make sense of this. If something's wrong, I'll handle it. You should take care of yourself." The call ended before Elias could say more, the click of the receiver sounding like a final dismissal. He sat back, the cold dread settling deeper into his bones. He had tried to avert the inevitable, but the mirror's reflection was not to be ignored or altered so easily. Days passed in a haze of anxious waiting. Elias kept the mirror close, his nights spent watching the glass for any sign, any change. Then, the news came: the accident. Jonathan had died suddenly, the details grisly and inexplicable. The headlines on the brittle newspaper scraps confirmed the mirror's cruel prophecy with brutal clarity. Elias's hands trembled as he gathered the clippings, his mind a tumultuous storm of grief, guilt, and mounting paranoia. He began to record every detail, every face that appeared in the mirror, desperate to find some pattern, some loophole that might spare the next victim. His journal grew thick with notes and sketches, frantic scribbles that traced connections and timelines. Each entry was a step deeper into obsession, the line between reality and reflection blurring as the mirror's influence tightened its grip. One night, as the rain lashed against the windows and shadows stretched long and uneasy, Elias stood before the mirror once more. The glass shimmered with faces, some familiar, some strangers, but all etched with the silent mark of death. He reached out, fingertips brushing the cold surface, only to recoil as the reflection shifted into a dark, swirling mass beneath the glass. A chill ran through him as the sense of inevitability wrapped around his heart like a vise. Elias knew then that the mirror was not simply a passive observer but an active force, binding fate and fear in an unbreakable cycle. Yet, even as despair threatened to engulf him, a flicker of determination took root. If the mirror showed the future, perhaps understanding it could offer a sliver of hope, some way to break the chain before the next life was lost. But the cost of such knowledge was high, and the price still unknown. The mirror waited silently, its secrets buried beneath the gleaming surface, daring Elias to look deeper into the abyss that reflected not just faces, but the very essence of dread and mortality. The night stretched on, the city outside forgotten. As Elias stared into the glass, each reflection a whispered warning and a challenge. Somewhere beyond the thin veil of the mirror, fate watched and waited, unyielding and merciless. And Elias was caught beneath its skin, trapped in a nightmare from which there might be no awakening. Elias Marlowe hesitated outside the narrow doorway of the old townhouse that Mara Voss called her study. The street was quiet, the muted hum of distant traffic barely reaching this forgotten corner. He gripped the ornate mirror carefully, the weight of it almost tangible in his arms. The mirror's carved frame was intricate, filigreed with twisting vines and strange symbols that seemed to writhe beneath his touch. He had waited too long to seek help, the images haunting his nights growing ever more vivid and terrifying. Now was the time. He crossed the threshold, stepping into a dimly lit room lined with towering bookshelves sagging under the weight of ancient tomes and brittle manuscripts. The scent of old paper and melting wax filled the air, mingling with the faint aroma of herbs Mara often burned to keep the air clear. At a cluttered desk sat Mara Voss, her sharp eyes lifted from a leather-bound volume as he entered. Her short, dark hair framed a face that was both inquisitive and cautious, her practical clothing marking her more as a scholar than a mystic. "Elias," she said, voice steady yet warm. "I wasn't sure you'd come." He nodded, setting the mirror gently against a sturdy oak table. "I don't know who else to turn to. This thing isn't just a curiosity, it's something else entirely." Mara's gaze flicked to the mirror, the candlelight casting ghostly shadows that seemed to dance on its surface. "Show me." Elias hesitated, then lifted the mirror slightly, angling it so Mara could peer into its depths. The reflection shimmered, not revealing her image, but the face of an unknown man, pale, eyes wide with terror. Mara blinked, the scholar's skepticism momentarily shaken. "What is this?" she murmured. "It shows the face of the next person to die," Elias said quietly, voice taut with dread. "I've seen it happen. I saw a friend's reflection last night. He died this morning." Mara closed her eyes briefly, gathering her composure. "These mirrors, Elias," she began, "have a long and dark history. There are legends of cursed objects, death oracles that reveal not truths of the soul, but the inevitability of fate itself." For hours they pored over Mara's collection of texts, the flickering candlelight illuminating pages filled with archaic script and ominous illustrations. Elias's fingers traced the words as Mara translated passages describing mirrors bound by dark magic, objects that fed on fear and sealed destinies. The room seemed to close in around them, shadows deepening as the weight of the curse settled between them like a living thing. "There may be no way to undo what's been set in motion," Mara said, voice low but resolute. "But knowledge is power, Elias. If we understand the origin and mechanism of this curse, perhaps we can find a crack in its armor." Elias felt a flicker of hope, fragile as a candle flame in a storm. "I don't want to be a victim," he said. "I want to fight it." Mara nodded, her eyes reflecting the mirror's eerie glow. "Then we begin at the beginning." As Elias prepared to leave, clutching his notes and the mirror wrapped carefully in a cloth, Mara's gaze lingered on the object. A shadow flickered beneath its surface, a whisper of movement that made her heart tighten. She forced a smile. "Be careful, Elias. Some mirrors don't just reflect, they consume." Outside, the night air was cold and sharp, the city's distant sounds muffled by the weight of silence. Elias walked away, the mirror heavy in his hands, a symbol of dread and determination. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice wondered if this new alliance would be his salvation or the beginning of the end. The journey into darkness had only just begun, and the mirror waited patiently, its surface shimmering with the promise of secrets yet to be revealed. The study was awash in the heavy haze of twilight, the last slivers of daylight filtered through thick, dust-laden curtains, casting long, somber shadows across the cluttered room. Elias Marlowe sat rigidly in his high-backed chair, the ornate mirror resting on the desk before him like a silent sentinel. Its frame carved with grotesque, twisting vines and eerie faces frozen in mid-scream, seemed almost to breathe in the dim light, the lacquered wood glinting faintly. For hours, Elias had been captivated by the mirror's glass, his eyes searching the depths for any sign, any shift beyond mere reflection. The legend he had heard, the promise of a mirror revealing the true self, had twisted into something far darker. This was no ordinary glass. The faces it revealed were not his own but those of others, people whose lives were soon to be extinguished. And now something new stirred beneath the surface. As he leaned closer, a delicate ripple coursed across the mirror's face, like a soft sigh escaping from some hidden breath. The room seemed to freeze in time, the silence pressing against his ears until his own heartbeat roared like thunder in his chest. Then, faint and nearly imperceptible, a shape began to emerge beneath the glass, a shadowy figure, shifting and writhing just out of focus, as if trapped in some watery abyss. It was not a reflection nor a trick of light. It was something alive, something watching. Elias recoiled slightly but was drawn back by a force he could neither explain nor resist. His fingers trembled as they hovered over the mirror's surface, the air around him growing inexplicably cold. The shadow beneath the glass pulsed in time with his racing pulse, an unholy rhythm that seemed to mock his attempts to control it. He could feel its hunger, its thirst for fear, for the dread that now filled every corner of his mind. In the mirror's depths, faces flashed, some familiar, others unknown, each expression etched with terror and silent despair. One moment, an elderly woman with eyes wide in shock. The next, a child frozen mid-scream. Their images flickered and faded, replaced by the shadow's writhing form, a dark heart beating beneath the glass. The oppressive weight of inevitability pressed down on Elias's shoulders. He was no longer a mere observer. He was a prisoner of the mirror's will, dragged ever deeper into its nightmare. His breath came in short, ragged gasps as the line between reality and reflection blurred, the shadows creeping from the glass into the corners of the room, threatening to swallow him whole. Memories surfaced unbidden: his lost friend, the inexplicable death that had shattered his world, the relentless obsession that now consumed him. The mirror was a doorway, a threshold between worlds, and the shadow beneath was its sentinel, its curse made manifest. Elias knew now that the mirror did not merely reveal fate. It enforced it. Hours passed like minutes as Elias sat, trapped by the mirror's gaze. The shadow beneath the glass seemed to grow bolder, its shape becoming more distinct yet no less terrifying, an amorphous silhouette with flickering eyes that burned like coals in the dark. It was a presence that fed on despair, drawing strength from the dread that twisted Elias's soul. Suddenly, the silence shattered. A low, guttural whisper seemed to emanate from the mirror itself, words incomprehensible yet laden with menace curling through the air. Elias's skin prickled with cold sweat as he realized the mirror was speaking not in language, but in the raw essence of fear. He tried to look away, to break the spell, but his eyes were locked, his body rooted to the spot. The shadow reached out, tendrils of darkness stretching toward him, brushing against his reflection. In that moment, Elias glimpsed something terrifying, his own face, pale and drawn, eyes wide with horror, destined to become the next reflection within the cursed glass. With a gasp, he tore his gaze away, stumbling back from the desk. The room seemed to tilt, the shadows receding but never fully vanishing. Elias's breath was ragged, his mind racing with the knowledge that the mirror's curse was no longer a distant threat, it was a living nightmare closing in. Desperation clawed at him. He knew he had to understand this shadow, to uncover the truth beneath the glass before it was too late. But with every glance, every whispered secret from the mirror, the noose of fate tightened, dragging him closer to the abyss. And somewhere, deep beneath the surface of the glass, the shadow waited, patient and eternal. A dark promise that death's reflection was inevitable, and that beneath the skin of the mirror, nothing was ever truly safe. Elias did not yet know whether he would conquer the curse or be consumed by it. But one thing was certain: the mirror's shadow had claimed him, and the dread would only deepen from here. The mirror's glass shimmered faintly as the last light of day vanished, and the room was swallowed by darkness except for the faint, flickering outline of the shadow beneath the glass, watching, waiting, eternal. The knock at the door was sudden, a sharp rap that echoed through the silent apartment like a warning bell. Elias Marlowe, seated at his cluttered desk strewn with notes and sketches, looked up from the mirror's cold surface. For a moment, the reflection was calm, deceptively so, before the shadows beneath the glass twitched restlessly. Heart-pounding, he rose cautiously and approached the door, his footsteps muffled against the worn wooden floor. Peering through the peephole, Elias saw a figure thin and hunched, with wild gray hair that seemed to bristle against the dim light of the hallway. The man's hands trembled visibly as he raised a knuckled fist and knocked again, this time more insistently. Elias hesitated, a shiver running down his spine. There was something in this visitor's presence that unsettled him, a tangible aura of despair and fear. Slowly, Elias unlocked the door and opened it just enough to reveal the stranger's gaunt face. Deep-set eyes, sunken cheeks, and the hollow look of someone who had stared too long into darkness met his gaze. "Mr. Marlowe." The man rasped, the voice brittle yet urgent. "My name is Harold Finch. We need to talk about the mirror." Elias swallowed hard, a chill crawling over his skin. "How did you find me?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Harold stepped inside before an answer could be given, his movements unsteady but determined. The apartment felt suddenly smaller, the air thick with unspoken dread. Elias watched as Harold's eyes roved nervously around the room until they settled on the ornate mirror propped against the wall. A flicker of recognition passed over the older man's face, quickly replaced by a grimace. "I had one like it once," Harold began, settling into a creaking chair. "Not the same exactly, but cursed all the same. The reflections, they don't lie. They don't show you who you are, but who's next to die." Elias felt a cold hand clutch his heart. "I know," he said, voice hollow. "I've seen it myself." Harold nodded, rubbing his trembling hands together. "It's a burden, that knowledge. It twists your mind. I lost everything, my sanity, my family, my life. The mirror demands sacrifices, Mr. Marlowe. It feeds on fear, on desperation. It is relentless." The candlelight flickered, casting grotesque shadows against the walls lined with Elias's detailed notes and sketches. The silence between them was profound, broken only by the distant patter of rain against the windowpane. Harold reached into his worn coat and pulled out a battered journal, its pages yellowed and edges frayed. "I kept this," he said, voice cracking. "A record of what I saw, what I tried to stop, but the mirror always wins." Elias took the journal with trembling fingers, flipping through the frantic scrawls and twisted drawings of faces distorted by fear and death. Each page bore witness to a soul claimed by the cursed glass, each entry a lament for a fate sealed. "There's no escape," Harold whispered, eyes darkening. "You can't change what's reflected. You can't outrun it." The weight of Harold's words pressed down on Elias like a stone sinking in a black sea. Yet beneath the despair, a spark of defiance flickered. "There must be a way," Elias murmured. "There has to be." Harold shook his head slowly. "I wanted to believe that too. But the mirror doesn't care. It only demands the truth beneath the skin, the inevitability beneath the reflection." A sudden crash from the street below shattered the fragile calm. Both men flinched, their eyes locking in shared dread. Elias felt the mirror's cold pull tighten around him, an invisible noose drawing him deeper into its fatal embrace. As Harold prepared to leave, he placed a trembling hand on Elias's shoulder. "Be careful," he warned. "Once the mirror chooses you, there's no turning back." The door closed softly behind him, leaving Elias alone with the mirror's silent gaze. The reflection shimmered, the faintest hint of a shadow moving just beneath the glass. Elias sank back into his chair, the journal heavy in his lap. The stories within were warnings etched in madness and despair, a testament to the mirror's curse. And now, with Harold's words echoing in his mind, Elias understood the terrifying truth. Knowledge of one's fate might be the cruelest curse of all. Yet still, he could not look away. The mirror's secret beckoned him onward, deeper into the darkness where reflection and reality blurred, and the line between life and death thinned to a razor's edge. The night stretched on, and outside, the rain whispered of inevitability. Elias Marlowe hesitated at the edge of the shadowed street, the antique shop's weathered sign creaking softly in the chill breeze. The night had settled thickly over the city, folding the narrow lane into a corridor of darkness and forgotten things. He pushed open the door, the bell above tinkling faintly, an almost reluctant greeting. Inside, the scent of aged wood, dust, and something faintly metallic wrapped around him like a shroud. The walls, lined with an endless array of mirrors, reflected fractured shards of dim light, their surfaces catching the flicker of his lantern as though alive. Behind the counter stood Lydia Crane, her presence as enigmatic as the shop itself. She was a woman carved from shadows, with eyes like dark wells that seemed to draw in rather than reflect light. Draped in flowing black garments that absorbed the scant illumination, she watched Elias approach with a quiet intensity that unsettled him more than any ghostly reflection. "Back so soon," Lydia said, her voice a low murmur that seemed to ripple through the still air. "I wondered when you might return." Elias swallowed hard, gripping the mirror wrapped in cloth beneath his arm. "I need to understand," he began, voice tight with urgency. "This mirror, you said it reveals the true self, but it doesn't. I see faces of those who soon die." Lydia's eyes darkened, and she stepped out from behind the counter, the floorboards creaking softly beneath her measured steps. She placed the mirror on the counter with reverence, fingers tracing the ornate carvings etched deep into the frame. "True self," she echoed, a dangerous phrase. "This mirror was never meant to show what lies skin deep. It peers beneath to the marrow of fate itself." Elias frowned, his pulse quickening. "Fate? You mean it shows who will die next? It reveals what is," Lydia replied, voice barely above a whisper. "But beware, Elias. Some truths are shadows best left unchased. The mirror feeds on fear, on the dread of the inevitable. It does not lie, it only reflects destiny's cruel design." He leaned closer, the glass surface catching the lantern's flicker, fractured images dancing beneath. "Can it be stopped? Broken?" Lydia's gaze hardened, a flicker of something ancient and unyielding flashing in her eyes. To break the mirror is to break the bond it holds with fate. But such acts come at a cost often heavier than death itself. Elias's breath caught, the weight of her words settling like cold stones in his chest. "What cost?" A faint, almost sad smile touched her lips. "Some mirrors do not just reflect, they consume. And those who seek to defy the reflection often find themselves swallowed by it." He stepped back, the room seeming to close in, the countless mirrored faces pressing in around him. "Why sell it to me?" "Because every curse needs a bearer," Lydia said softly. "And every bearer believes they can outwit the dark." Elias's hands trembled, the mirror's surface suddenly rippling as if alive. A shadow flickered beneath the glass, a fleeting glimpse of a twisted form, impossible to grasp. He tore his gaze away, heart hammering. The bell above the door chimed as he turned to leave. Lydia's voice followed him, soft and ominous. "Remember, Elias, some reflections are doorways. And once opened, they are not easily closed. Outside, the night swallowed him whole." The shop's windows gleamed faintly behind him, mirrors catching the moonlight in eerie patterns. Elias's mind churned, the weight of unanswered questions pressing down with suffocating urgency. What had he truly purchased? And how deep did the darkness behind the glass run? The mirror's secret lay buried beneath layers of shadow and silence, and Lydia's cryptic warnings gnawed at the edges of his sanity. The line between reflection and reality blurred, and Elias felt the noose of dread tightening inexorably around his soul. He knew, beyond doubt, that his journey had only just begun, and the mirror's grip would not loosen until it claimed its due. Outside, the city whispered its forgotten tales, but within the antique shop the mirrors waited silent, watchful, eternal. The cramped study was suffused with the scent of old paper and a faint trace of candle smoke, casting a soft, flickering glow over the piles of ancient tomes and brittle manuscripts that cluttered the wooden desk. Elias Marlowe sat hunched, fingers trembling slightly as he traced the faded lettering of a particularly delicate book. Across from him, Mara Voss leaned forward, her sharp eyes scanning the text with a practiced intensity that belied her initial skepticism. "These aren't just random artifacts," Mara murmured, her voice low, almost reverent. "There's a lineage, a chain of mirrors crafted centuries ago, each bound by dark magic. They weren't merely designed to reflect, but to reveal and enforce fate." Elias nodded, his pale face illuminated intermittently by the dancing candlelight. "So this mirror isn't unique. It's part of a cursed history, each piece linked by the same malevolent force." The implications were chilling. Each mirror, a vessel of death, had claimed lives, its reflections an oracle of doom. The manuscripts spoke of collectors who'd succumbed to despair, their fates sealed by the very objects they coveted. The line between myth and reality blurred in the oppressive silence of the room. "Look here," Mara pointed to a scribbled note in the margin. "The curse feeds on fear, binding those who gaze upon the glass to an inescapable fate." Elias swallowed hard, the weight of dread settling deeper into his bones. He thought of the faces he had seen reflected, each a harbinger of death. The neighbor from the next street, the woman from the cafe, the stranger whose haunted eyes had stared back from the silvered surface. Each reflection a countdown. Later that evening, Elias stood alone in his dimly lit apartment, the ornate mirror looming like a silent sentinel. The glass shimmered, distorting with a subtle ripple, then steadied to reveal a pale face, an unfamiliar man with hollow eyes and a tight jaw. Elias's breath caught. The man was his neighbor, a quiet figure he barely knew. The room was deathly silent except for the faint hum of the city beyond the curtained windows. Fear twisted inside Elias, a cold knot tightening with every second. He reached out tentatively, fingertips grazing the mirror's edge, as if to confirm the reality of the vision. But the reflection held steady, a grim prophecy etched beneath the skin of the glass. The following days bore the heavy weight of inevitability. Elias and Mara pored over more texts, piecing together the curse's dark puzzle. Each new reflection brought fresh terror, the pattern of death tightening inexorably around him. Mara's calm pragmatism was a fragile anchor as Elias's paranoia deepened, the line between hope and despair fraying dangerously. Then came the phone call. The voice on the other end was quiet, formal. "Mr. Marlowe, I'm afraid your neighbor passed away last night. Sudden heart failure, they say." The words struck Elias like a blow, shattering the fragile hope he had clung to. The mirror's prophecy was no longer a distant threat, it was a relentless, consuming reality. The dread that had been simmering beneath his skin now boiled to the surface, a dark tide pulling him closer to the abyss. Mara reached out, her hand steady on his arm. "We have to keep going," she urged softly. "If there's a way to end this, we'll find it." But as Elias stared back into the mirror, the faces multiplied, each a ghostly echo of death's inevitable approach. The cursed lineage of mirrors was a chain that bound them all, and the noose of dread tightened with every passing moment. The patterns of death were clear now, and the question that haunted Elias was no longer if, but when the mirror would claim him as its next victim. The candle flickered once more, shadows dancing like specters on the walls, whispering secrets beneath the skin of the mirror. And somewhere, just beyond the glass, the curse waited patiently, unyielding and eternal. The knock came unexpectedly, sharp and insistent against the weathered wood of Elias' apartment door. For a moment, he hesitated, his gaze flickering from the ornate mirror that dominated the corner of the room to the sound echoing down the empty hallway. The mirror's surface, usually still and unyielding, seemed to ripple faintly, a subtle distortion that sent a shiver through his spine. Elias rose slowly, each step weighted by the exhaustion that had become his constant companion. He opened the door to find a figure wrapped in a coat too thin for the biting cold, a woman whose eyes held a mixture of worry and wariness that immediately unsettled him. "Elias," she said softly, her voice tentative but resolute, "it's been too long." He recognized her instantly, his sister, though years and silence had softened the lines of their shared history. Her gaze searched his face, noting the pallor, the shadows beneath his eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly as they gripped the doorframe. "What are you doing here?" Elias managed, his voice hoarse and guarded. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, the familiar scent of lavender and earth filling the cramped space. Her eyes drifted immediately to the mirror, a flicker of apprehension crossing her face. "I've been worried," she confessed, voice barely above a whisper. "You've been so distant, so consumed. Alia swallowed hard, the words he wanted to say caught in a tangle of fear and stubborn pride. It's nothing. Just work. Research. Research. Her brow furrowed. Elias, this isn't like you. You re-obsessed with that mirror, ever since you brought it home. He looked away, unable to meet her gaze. The mirror seemed to pulse behind him, a silent sentinel reflecting not his face, but the faces of those destined to die. I need to understand it, he said quietly. I have to. She took a step closer, her hands reaching out but hesitating before resting lightly on his arm. This isn't understanding, Elias, it's destruction. It's killing you slowly. Please, let it go. A bitter laugh escaped him. Let it go. How can I? When it shows me who will die next. When it's the only window I have to prevent more deaths. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. But at what cost? Your health, your sanity, our family, everything you used to be. For a moment, silence fell between them, thick and suffocating. The room seemed to shrink, the shadows cast by the flickering lamp dancing like specters on the walls. You don't understand, Elias whispered, voice breaking. I lost someone close. I couldn't save them. This mirror. It's the only way I can make sure it never happens again. She nodded slowly, the pain in her eyes mirroring his own. I know you're scared, but you can't fight fate alone. You need help. He shook his head, a desperate edge creeping into his tone. I'm already too far gone. The hours passed in strained conversation, the fragile threads of their relationship fraying with each word. She shared stories of the outside world, of friends and family who missed him, of life continuing unabated beyond the walls of his obsession. Yet Elias remained distant, the mirror's silent command weighing heavier with every moment. When she finally stood to leave, her parting words lingered in the air like a fragile hope. Come back to us, Elias. Before it's too late. Alone once more, Elias sank to the floor beside the mirror, his fingers trembling as they traced the intricate carvings of its frame. The glass shimmered softly, and in its depths, a face emerged pale, unfamiliar, yet hauntingly real. He closed his eyes, swallowing the rising tide of dread. The mirror's curse was no longer just a mystery, it was a living nightmare. One that threatened to consume not only those it showed, but the very soul of the man who dared to look beneath its surface. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the silent horrors unfolding within a small, cluttered apartment. But for Elias, the fractured bond with his sister was yet another reflection of the cost of his obsession, a reminder that some mirrors do not just reveal truth. They fracture the very lives that gaze upon them. And as the night deepened, the mirror waited, patient and unyielding, its reflections shimmering with the promise of dread yet to come. Detective Rowan arrived just as the late afternoon sun dipped behind the skeletal silhouettes of the forgotten streets. The antique shop was a cramped, shadow-haunted cavern, its walls lined with myriad mirrors, each one catching and fracturing the meager light into fractured shards that danced on dust motes. Elias Marlowe stood near the center, pale and taut, his eyes flickering nervously between the detective and the wall of reflections. You expect me to believe this mirror somehow predicts death? Rowan asked, his voice low but edged with incredulity. His trench coat was threadbare, hanging from a frame worn thin by years of witnessing human frailty and cruelty. Yet beneath his professional skepticism, there was a spark of curiosity, a hunger to untangle the impossible. Elias swallowed hard, fingers twitching as he gestured toward the ornate mirror that had become the epicenter of his unraveling. It's not just superstition. The faces I see, those who look back from the glass they die, detective, without fail. Rowan's eyes narrowed, scanning the mirror's surface, the carved woodwork seeming to pulse faintly in the fading light. And you've documented this. Every reflection, Elias whispered, pulling a battered notebook from his coat pocket. The pages were thick with scrawled names, dates, and grim outcomes. I tried to stop it, warn them. But it's like fate is woven into the glass. The detective crouched, tracing a finger along one of the entries. You've been chasing a ghost, Marlowe. Or worse, inviting it in. Their conversation was interrupted by the intermittent chime of the shop's ancient clock, its sound hollow in the heavy silence that had settled. Rowan stood abruptly, eyes still fixed on the mirror. "I'm going to look into these deaths. If there's a pattern, I'll find it." Elias nodded, but a shadow of dread darkened his expression. This was no longer a solitary battle. The mirror's curse was breaking into the world outside his isolation. Days passed, each one thick with rain and restless shadows. Rowan visited the scenes of the latest deaths, places where the mirror's grim prophecy had come to pass. He noted details that defied simple explanation: a fleeting shadow caught on surveillance footage, inexplicable reflections in broken glass, the chilling absence of struggle. One evening, Rowan and Elias met again in the cramped apartment Elias called home. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and cold sweat. Rain lashed against the windowpane, a relentless percussion that mirrored their mounting tension. "The deaths aren't random," Rowan said, voice grim. They reconnected. "And something about this mirror ties them all together." Elias's hands trembled as he laid out the notebook, the faces and names blurring beneath his shaking fingers. "I've been trying to find a way out, some loophole. But the mirror's grip tightens with every death." Rowan's gaze hardened. "We need to understand it, or it will keep claiming victims, including you." In the days that followed, the detective's skepticism slowly gave way to a reluctant acceptance of the unnatural. Yet the more he learned, the more the lines between reality and reflection blurred. One night, they returned to the antique shop. The mirrors loomed like silent sentinels, their surfaces dark pools that seemed to breathe with a life of their own. Rowan stood before the ornate mirror, the very one that had ensnared Elias's fate. His reflection wavered, fractured. For a heartbeat, beneath the glass, a shadowy figure flickered, a twisted mockery of his own face, eyes hollow and accusing. "What the hell?" Rowan breathed, stepping back, heart pounding. Elias reached out, voice barely audible. "It's showing you too. The curse is real." The detective swallowed down the rising tide of disbelief and dread. The investigation was no longer just a matter of solving crimes. It was a battle against an ancient and merciless force, one that fed on fear and sealed fates beneath the cold surface of the glass. As the night deepened, the two men stood locked in uneasy alliance, shadows flickering and warping around them. Outside, the city slept, unaware of the peril lurking behind the antique shop's windows, a mirror that whispered of death and destiny, waiting patiently for the next eye to meet its cursed reflection. The question now was not if they could stop it, but how, and whether the price of that knowledge would be too high to pay. And somewhere, deep beneath the surface of the mirror, the curse watched and waited. Harold Finch's arrival at Elias Marlowe's apartment was marked by an unsettling stillness that seemed to absorb every stray sound. The gaunt man, with wild grey hair and trembling hands, looked as if he had been dragged through a storm and left stranded on a desolate shore. His eyes, glassy and darting, betrayed a mind fraying at the edges. Elias, though accustomed to solitude and shadows, felt an immediate pang of discomfort, a dark prelude to the chaos that Harold would soon unleash. "You don't understand," Harold whispered shortly after removing his threadbare coat, his voice a brittle thread barely holding together. "It's not just the deaths. It's the watching, the waiting, the knowing. The mirror, it doesn't just show who's next. It burrows inside you. It eats at your mind until there's nothing left but fear." Elias studied him closely, noting the twitch of Harold's lip and the way his fingers trembled as he clutched an old leather-bound notebook. "Tell me everything," Elias urged softly, a mixture of curiosity and dread tightening his chest. Harold's hands fumbled to open the notebook, revealing pages filled with frantic scrawlings, names, dates, and grotesque sketches of faces contorted with terror. "I tried to escape it," he said, voice cracking. "I thought I could outwit the curse, but it's a parasite. It feeds on your fear, your obsession. The more you look, the deeper it sinks its claws." As the hours passed, Harold's words grew more disjointed, his warnings more desperate. He spoke of shadowy figures lurking beneath the glass, whispers that echoed in the dead of night, and a relentless countdown that no one could halt. Elias listened, torn between skepticism and the gnawing realization that he was sliding down the same treacherous path. The apartment, dimly lit by a single desk lamp, seemed to shrink around them. Every creak of the old building, every flicker of light from the mirror in the corner, heightened the oppressive atmosphere. Elias found himself glancing repeatedly at the mirror, its surface rippling with distorted reflections that teased the edges of his vision. At one point, Harold began sketching furiously on scraps of paper, his trembling hands producing images that seemed to bleed with a life of their own twisted faces. Shadowy forms and abstract patterns that suggested a malevolent intelligence lurking just beyond comprehension. "It's trying to tell me something," Harold muttered, eyes wild. "But the message is shattered, broken. Like my mind." Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's stale air. "How do you know it's broken?" he asked quietly. Harold's gaze fixed on him, a flicker of clarity piercing the chaos. "Because it's still calling me, still demanding. The curse isn't satisfied until it's claimed its due." Suddenly, Harold's body convulsed, and he collapsed to the floor, clutching his head as though trying to hold his thoughts together. "The final demand," he gasped, eyes squeezed shut. "The sacrifice, it's coming." Elias rushed to his side, heart pounding in a rhythm of terror and urgency. He helped Harold to a chair, his mind racing to piece together the fragmented warnings. The mirror's curse was no longer a distant threat, it was a living, breathing nightmare consuming those who dared to peer beneath the surface. As the night deepened, Elias sat beside the broken man, the weight of the mirror's reflection pressing heavily on his soul. The line between reality and madness blurred, leaving only the cold certainty that the dread they both faced was inexorable. And somewhere, deep within the glass, the shadow of the curse waited, patient and unyielding. Elias knew, with a sinking certainty, that his own descent had only just begun. The clock ticked relentlessly. Outside, the city's muted hum was a distant echo, swallowed by the oppressive silence inside the apartment. Elias pored over the scattered papers Harold had left behind, trying to decipher the cryptic notes and frantic sketches. Each symbol seemed to pulse with a dark energy, a language of fear written in desperation. Mara's words from days earlier echoed in his mind. Knowledge was a double-edged sword. The more he sought to understand the mirror, the more entwined he became in its malevolent web. Harold's collapse was a grim testament to the cost of such forbidden insight. Elias's fingers brushed against the mirror's cold frame as he rose, the surface flickering with a spectral glow. In its depths, he glimpsed not his own reflection, but faint shadows, whispers of the curse's eternal hunger. He shivered, the dread coiling tighter around his heart. A sudden knock at the door startled him. Detective Rowan's skeptical yet concerned face appeared, breaking the suffocating solitude. Elias hesitated, then opened the door, knowing that the nightmare they faced was growing beyond the confines of his private obsession. "We need to talk," Rowan said, stepping inside. "The pattern's worse than I thought." Elias nodded, steeling himself for the long, dark road ahead. The mirror's grip was tightening, and the descent into madness far from over. The chapter closes on Elias standing before the mirror once more, his pale face reflected back with a haunted intensity. Behind the glass, shadows shift and twist promises of death, despair, and the inexorable pull of fate. The dread is palpable, a living thing that threatens to consume him whole. As Harold's broken warnings echo in his mind, Elias realizes that the true horror is not what the mirror shows, but what it does to those who dare to look. The descent into madness is only beginning. The faint glow of the solitary desk lamp threw long shadows across Elias Marlowe's cramped apartment, illuminating a chaotic sea of papers, sketches, and hastily scribbled notes. His thin fingers trembled as they hovered over the ornate, cursed mirror that stood like a monolith on the battered wooden table. The glass itself seemed to breathe beneath the flickering light, faces shifting and melting into one another, reflections that refused to obey the laws of the present moment. Elias's eyes, bloodshot and rimmed with exhaustion, darted from one distorted visage to another. The mirror did not show him any more, not really. Instead, it offered glimpses of those doomed to perish next. Each reflection was a harbinger, a cruel oracle whispering the fate that awaited. The knowledge clung to him like a second skin, suffocating and relentless. He had become a prisoner in his own mind, a solitary sentinel watching death's parade through a glass that knew no mercy. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, the strands coarse and dry from neglect. The apartment was silent, except for the low scratch of his pen against paper and the occasional creak of the aging building settling in the night. Outside, rain pattered softly against the windows, a mournful rhythm that echoed the dread tightening around his chest. The boundaries between reflection and reality had begun to dissolve. Sometimes, when Elias stared too long, the mirror's surface rippled, as though liquid rather than glass. Shadows flickered beneath the ornate frame, distorting into shapes that defied logic, glimpses of a shadowy figure lurking just beyond the veil, the dark force animating the mirror's curse. The air grew heavier with each passing hour, as if the mirror exhaled a cold breath that seeped into his bones. He remembered Harold Finch's warnings, the frail man's haunted eyes, the tremble in his voice as he recounted his descent into madness. Elias feared he was following the same path, the creeping madness that the mirror whispered into his soul. Yet he could not stop. Every reflection was a puzzle piece, every death a clue. He had to understand. He had to find a way to break the cycle before more lives were claimed. A soft knock at the door jolted him from his spiraling thoughts. His heart hammered violently in his chest as he hesitated, the paranoia whispering that even the smallest intrusion might herald disaster. After a long pause, the knock came again, more insistent. "Elias, it's me, Mara. I need to see you," came the voice from the other side, steady, concerned, a tether to the world outside his descent. Swallowing the lump in his throat, Elias moved to open the door. Mara Voss stepped inside, her sharp eyes quickly taking in the disarray. The faint scent of rain clung to her coat, mingling with the stale air of the room. "You look worse," she said softly, stepping further in. "You've been holed up here for days." Elias's lips twitched in a weak smile. The mirror, it's changing, the reflections there more volatile. "I don't know how much longer I can hold on." Mara approached cautiously, her gaze flickering to the mirror. The glass shimmered unnaturally, faces morphing in violent succession. "We need to find a way to sever the curse," she said firmly. "There has to be something in the texts. I found something we missed." Elias nodded, grateful yet wary. The knowledge Mara brought was a lifeline, but he feared it was only a matter of time before the mirror's grip tightened beyond escape. That night, as Mara pored over ancient manuscripts, Elias sat glued to the mirror, his hands shaking as he catalogued every shift and flicker. The faces appeared faster now, their eyes pleading, accusing, resigned. He felt the weight of inevitability crushing him, the mirror's curse waving tighter around his soul. The whisper came again, barely audible but unmistakable. Elias leaned closer, breath fogging the glass. A shadow twisted beneath the surface, a dark figure just out of focus, beckoning him deeper into the nightmare. His obsession had become a prison. The mirror was no longer merely a window, it was a trap, a predator feeding on his fear and isolation. And Elias knew with a chilling certainty that the next reflection might be his own, but still, he would fight. Even as the mirror's grip tightened, he clung to the fragile hope that knowledge could be a weapon, not just a curse. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming a relentless dirge that matched the pounding of his heart, a herald of the darkness yet to come. The night stretched on, thick with dread and determination. As Elias Marlowe stood watch beneath the skin of the mirror, caught between reflection and reality, life and death. The cramped study was heavy with the scent of old paper and lingering dust. the air thick with the weight of centuries as Mara Voss flipped through fragile pages, yellowed with age. The flickering candlelight threw erratic shadows across the walls, illuminating cryptic symbols and intricate drawings of mirrors, each sketched with meticulous care by hands long vanished from the earth. Mara's sharp eyes narrowed as she traced the arcane inscriptions, her fingers trembling slightly from a mixture of cold and anticipation. "Look at this, Elias," Mara murmured, her voice low and reverent. "This manuscript dates back to the late 16th century. It speaks of mirrors crafted to reveal the true nature of the soul artifacts of great power and dangerous truth." Elias leaned closer, his pale, gaunt face shadowed by the uneven candlelight. His deep-set eyes, rimmed with the exhaustion of sleepless nights, scanned the faded script. "And this mirror," he whispered, "it was one of those." Mara nodded slowly, her fingers gently brushing a detailed illustration of a mirror framed in twisted vines and eyes. "Yes, but there's more. Somewhere along the way, these mirrors were corrupted. Twisted by dark magic, their purpose perverted. Instead of revealing truth, they became oracles of death, instruments that foresee the inevitable end, binding fate and fear into a single reflection." A chill wind rattled the window panes, as if the very room responded to the dark revelation. Elias swallowed hard, the hairs on the back of his neck prickling. "So the mirror isn't just cursed," he said, voice barely audible. "It's feeding on fear and locking people into this cycle of death." "Exactly," Mara replied, eyes wide with the gravity of the knowledge. "The curse isn't just a superstition. It's a living force, sustained by dread and the inevitability it enforces. Those who gaze into it see not themselves, but the next soul destined to perish. And once the reflection appears, the fate is sealed." Elias's hands clenched into fists. "But why? Wasn't it supposed to show the true self?" Mara's gaze darkened. "The original mirrors were created by an enigmatic order seeking to strip away falsehoods and reveal hidden truths. But dark forces, perhaps jealous or fearful of such knowledge, corrupted the craft. The magic twisted, and the mirrors became harbingers of death, binding the viewer's future to a fatal reflection." The room fell silent save for the crackling candle flame, the oppressive weight of history pressing down on them. Elias's mind raced the faces he had seen, the deaths that followed. The fragile thread of hope he'd clung to now seemed thinner than ever. "Is there any way to break it?" he asked, voice hoarse. Mara closed the tome carefully, her expression grave but resolute. "If the curse feeds on fear and inevitability, then perhaps breaking it requires severing that cycle. But the text warns that the price is high. The mirror demands sacrifice, a final toll to maintain its power." Elias swallowed, the cold dread settling like stone in his chest. "So we retrapped," he said quietly, "bound by a curse that can only be undone through sacrifice." "Trapped, but not yet defeated," Mara said firmly. "Knowledge is a double-edged sword. It curses, yes, but it also lights the path forward. We have to find that path before the mirror claims another life, maybe even yours." Outside, the wind howled through the old city streets, carrying with it the echoes of countless souls ensnared by reflections that revealed not who they were, but how and when they would fall. Beneath the layers of dust and time, the cursed mirror waited, patient and unyielding, a silent sentinel of fate's inescapable grasp. The night deepened around them, the candle's flame sputtering, as if warning of the darkness still to come. And as Elias looked toward the ancient text, the shadows beneath the glass seemed to pulse, a heartbeat of dread echoing from the past, reaching forward to claim the future. They had uncovered the mirror's twisted origin, but that revelation was only the beginning. The true horror lay in what came next, confronting the relentless force that had ensnared so many, and finding a way to shatter the reflection before it shattered them all. And so, beneath the watchful eyes of history and shadow, Elias and Mara prepared to face the cursed truth, darker and more terrible than either had imagined. The mirror's grip was tightening, and the echo of death was growing louder still, promising that the next reflection would not be the last. The dim light of Elias' cluttered study flickered and danced against the ornate frame of the mirror, casting long shadows that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. He sat rigid, fists clenched on the table before him, eyes locked on the glass. For days, the mirror had haunted his thoughts, its cruel revelations gnawing at the edges of his sanity. Tonight was different. The reflection that rippled before him was no stranger's face. It was hers. His sister's face, pale and marked with an expression of raw terror, filled the glass. Her eyes, wide and shimmering with unshed tears, bore into his soul as though pleading for salvation. Elias' breath caught in his throat. The room seemed to contract around him, pressing in with suffocating weight. His heart hammered, a deafening drum in the silence. "No," he whispered, voice cracking. Not her. The world outside his window was still, the faint hum of the city at night a distant murmur. Yet inside a storm raged, an unbearable dread that twisted his insides. He reached out tentatively, fingertips brushing the cool surface of the mirror, but the glass remained unyielding, unchanging. The reflection persisted, unblinking, as if daring him to defy the truth it bore. Desperation propelled Elias to action. He grabbed his phone, hands trembling as he dialed the number he'd memorized years ago. The line rang, each chime a hammer blow to his hope. When her voice finally came through, warm and unsuspecting, a fragile thread of relief sparked within him. "Sarah," he said, voice low and urgent. "Listen to me carefully. You need to be careful. There's something wrong, something dangerous. Elias." "What's going on?" "You're scaring me," she replied, concern threading through her words. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his voice. "I saw you in the mirror, the one I bought. It shows who will die next. And it's you, Sarah. You have to be careful. Please trust me." Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Then softly, "I'll be careful, I promise. Just don't worry so much." The call ended, but the knot in Elias' stomach tightened. He knew better than to trust hope. The mirror's curse was relentless, a merciless force beyond reason or will. He needed help. Mara Voss' door was answered with hurried knocks, her sharp eyes quickly reading the urgency etched into Elias' face. After a brief explanation, they pored over books and ancient texts, searching for any fragment of knowledge that might offer a way out. Hours slipped away in fevered research, the weight of the curse pressing heavier with each revelation. The mirror was no mere object. It was a conduit, a prison for dread and inevitability. Rain began to fall as Elias and Mara stepped into the night, the city transformed into a slick maze of shadows and reflections. Every sound was amplified, the splash of tires on wet pavement, the distant wail of sirens, the hurried footsteps of the desperate. They raced against time, hearts pounding in a rhythm of fear and hope. Elias' mind spun with possibilities and grim certainties. Could he change fate? Could he save her? Their search led them to a narrow alley, a place where light and shadow wove a tapestry of menace. There, in the chill of night, the echo of footsteps alerted them to danger. Elias' sister appeared, breathless and wide-eyed, a flicker of terror crossing her face. From the darkness emerged a figure, sinister and silent. Elias' protective instinct surged as he stepped forward, voice fierce and commanding, breaking the spell of dread that had gripped the moment. The figure hesitated, then vanished into the night, leaving behind a silence so profound it seemed to swallow the world. Relief washed over Elias, mingling with the residual terror. The curse had not claimed her yet, but the mirror's grip was tightening. Each reflection brought them closer to an abyss from which there might be no return. As dawn approached, Elias knew the battle was far from over. The mirror had shown him the next victim, but whether fate could be altered remained a question suspended in the cold light of day. And beneath the skin of the mirror, the shadows whispered on, waiting. The night had not ended, it had only deepened. The heavy silence of the antique shop was broken only by the faint, uneven rhythm of Elias's breathing as he stood before the mirror. The ornate frame, carved with twisting vines and faces frozen in silent screams, seemed to pulse in the dim light. His fingers trembled as he reached toward the glass, the surface unnervingly still. But then, as if the mirror had been holding its breath, the reflection shifted. The face that stared back at him was not his own, at least, not the Elias he knew. The eyes were his, but hollow, shadowed by an overwhelming wariness and fear that chilled him to the bone. The visage was pale, almost translucent, the skin stretched tight over gaunt cheeks. It was his face, yet marked unmistakably as the next to die. A cold sweat broke across Elias's forehead, his heart hammered against his ribs as the mirror's surface rippled like dark water disturbed by a stone. The room around him seemed to fade, the edges blurring until all that remained was the terrible certainty in that reflected gaze. "No," he whispered, a desperate plea lost to the oppressive air. The shadows deepened, pooling beneath the glass as an unnatural chill filled the room. From the depths of the mirror, a shape began to coalesce, a formless darkness, shifting and writhing as if alive. It was the curse itself, the malevolent force that had haunted Elias's every waking moment, now manifesting in a shadowy figure whose presence pressed down on him with suffocating weight. The figure's voice slithered into his mind, a whisper both ancient and cruel, promising the inevitability of death and the futility of resistance. Elias staggered back, but the pull of the mirror was irresistible. His fingers brushed the glass, and the chill that surged through him was like ice seeping into his bones. Suddenly, visions exploded behind his eyes, fleeting images of his own demise. A fractured street, a sudden fall, the cold embrace of darkness. Each scene flickered with terrifying clarity, blurring the line between memory and prophecy. Panic clawed at him, but beneath it stirred a stubborn ember of defiance. This was not merely a reflection. It was a challenge. He would not be consumed without a fight. Summoning every ounce of will, Elias fixed his gaze on his own haunted reflection, willing the fear to subside. The shadow beneath the glass writhed in fury, the surface cracking with sharp, spiderweb fractures that splintered the images within. The battle was both internal and otherworldly, his mind wrestling with terror and doubt, his soul grappling with the dark force seeking to claim him. The mirror's curse lashed out with whispers of despair, but Elias held firm, voice trembling yet resolute as he spoke into the void. "I am not yours to take." Shards of glass shimmered in the dim light, each fragment reflecting a fractured self-fear, hope, anger, and sorrow entwined in a chaotic dance. The mirror trembled, the curse faltering against Elias's determined spirit. Yet even as the darkness recoiled, a lingering unease settled deep within him. The boundary between reflection and reality was thinner now than ever, and the cost of defiance remained unknown. As the final shard settled, Elias collapsed to his knees, breath ragged and heart racing. The mirror lay fractured but unbroken, its curse still alive in the shards that caught the faintest glimmers of light. Outside, the antique shop waited in silence, shadows lengthening with the coming dusk. Elias's confrontation had changed everything, but whether it was enough to escape the fate reflected beneath the skin of the mirror was a question that hung heavy in the air, unanswered and ominous. The room's stillness was shattered by a distant creak, a reminder that the mirror's eyes were always watching, always waiting. And somewhere deep in the fractured glass, the dark force stirred anew, patient and hungry for what was yet to come. The cramped room was thick with an oppressive stillness, broken only by the faint crackle of candle flames dancing along the worn wooden shelves cluttered with relics and dusty tomes. Elias stood rigid before the mirror, its ornate frame carved with symbols that Mara had painstakingly traced from an ancient manuscript hours earlier. A pale glow emanated faintly from the sigils, as if the mirror itself was awakening to their presence. Mara's sharp eyes flicked between the text in her hands and the mirror's unsettling surface, where shadows seemed to writhe beneath the glass. "Are you ready?" Mara's voice was steady but laced with a tremor that betrayed her own fear. Elias swallowed hard, the weight of what lay ahead pressing on his chest. "I have to be. There's no other way." He adjusted the talisman clenched in his hand, a small, intricately wrought amulet, said to channel protective energy against curses. The air grew heavy electric as the two began the ritual. Mara's voice rose in measured cadence, reciting incantations in a language both ancient and harsh, each syllable seeming to tug at the very fabric of the room. The mirror's surface rippled like a disturbed pond, distorting Elias's reflection into grotesque and shifting visages. Faces of strangers morphed into the visage of those who had died, their eyes hollow, their mouths frozen in silent screams. Beneath the glass, a shadowy figure coiled and writhed, a dark presence that seemed to breathe and pulse with malevolent intent. Elias's heart pounded, a cold sweat slicking his skin. "It's fighting us," he whispered. Mara nodded, eyes never leaving the mirror. "It feeds on fear, on hesitation. We must hold fast." The boundaries between their cramped reality and the mirror's shadow realm began to blur. The walls around them seemed to warp, reflections multiplying and fracturing, echoing with faint, eerie whispers that slithered through the air like serpents. The mirror's curse was alive, a relentless force that demanded recognition and payment. As Mara's chanting intensified, the mirror pulsed violently, shooting shards of spectral light outward. The shards splintered like frozen screams, illuminating the room in bursts of sickly iridescence. Elias gritted his teeth, tightening his grip on the talisman, feeling the energy surge through him. Suddenly, the mirror's surface cracked, a jagged fracture spidering across the glass. From within, the shadowy entity emerged in a flicker, the embodiment of dread, of inevitable fate. Its voice was a rasping whisper that echoed inside Elias's mind. A sacrifice must be made. Elias staggered, the room spinning as the mirror's demand hung heavy in the air. Mara reached out, steadying him. "We knew this would come. The curse never lets go without a price." The choice loomed: surrender to the mirror's fatal prophecy or pay its price to break the cycle. The ritual had begun to unravel the mirror's power, but only at the cost of confronting the darkest truths of fate and mortality. Elias's breath was ragged, dread coiling around his heart like a serpent. The mirror shimmered, waiting, watching. The final act was upon them, a desperate gamble against the relentless shadow beneath the glass. "I won't let it win," Elias whispered, meeting Mara's determined gaze. "Not this time." The air thickened once more, the mirror's curse tightening its grip, even as the ritual strained to break free. Reality and reflection twisted into a surreal dance of light and shadow, heralding a confrontation that would decide not only Elias's fate, but the very nature of the curse that had haunted so many before him. As the candle flames guttered and the mirror's surface convulsed, Elias felt the thin veil between worlds begin to tear, a threshold to a realm where death's inevitability was writ in every reflection. The sacrifice awaited, and with it the terrifying possibility of freedom or eternal bondage. The room held its breath, suspended on the edge of nightmare and hope, as Elias stepped forward to meet the final demand beneath the skin of the mirror. The air around Elias thickened, the antique shop's familiar creaks and whispers fading into a suffocating silence. His fingers grazed the surface of the ornate mirror, its glass unnervingly cool beneath his touch. But then, as if responding to some unseen command, the surface rippled like disturbed water fluid, alive and beckoning. With a breath caught between fear and fascination, Elias felt himself pulled forward, the world tilting, twisting, until he was no longer standing in the shop, but submerged beneath the skin of the mirror itself. Darkness enveloped him, thick and viscous, shadows writhing like living things just beyond the edges of sight. Faces flickered in the gloom, those of strangers, friends, and foes, each frozen in silent screams or hollow eyes, the harbingers of death the mirror had foretold. He stumbled forward, heart hammering, senses assaulted by the echo of whispered warnings and accusations that seemed to emanate from the fractured reflections all around. The corridor he found himself in was lined with shards of broken mirrors, each reflecting grotesque distortions of himself, pale, gaunt, eyes wide with terror. another with a cracked smile slipping into despair, yet another dissolving into shadow and nothingness. Each reflection whispered secrets he could almost understand, voices layered with dread and sorrow, urging him to turn back, to accept fate, to surrender. But Alias pressed on, drawn inexorably toward a deeper darkness. Beneath the glass, a shape began to emerge, a shifting, amorphous shadow that coalesced into a figure both dreadful and mesmerizing. The mirror's curse itself, the ancient force bound to the mirror, manifested in undulating waves of darkness and shards of fractured light. Its voice was a chorus of whispers and roars, echoing the inevitability of death and the futility of resistance. "You cannot escape," it intoned, the sound scraping against Elias's psyche like nails on glass. "All who gaze into the mirror see their end. All are bound by the reflection's truth." The world around Elias warped and twisted, walls bending like liquid, floors dissolving into mist. Yet amidst the chaos, a fragile glimmer of light flickered, a heartbeat of hope. Summoning every shred of courage, Elias faced the entity, his voice trembling but defiant. "There must be another way," he whispered, "something beyond this endless cycle of fear and death. I refuse to be a prisoner of this reflection." The shadow figure recoiled slightly, as if surprised by the audacity of the mortal before it. For a moment, silence reigned, the oppressive weight of the realm lifting briefly. Then the mirror's surface shimmered, shards of light scattering like stars across an obsidian sky, hinting at the fragile boundary between fate and free will. Elias's breath came in ragged gasps as he realized that this confrontation was not merely a battle of strength, but a test of will, a choice that would determine not only his fate, but the very nature of the cursed mirror itself. Yet as the shadows closed in once more, the mirror's sinister pull surged with renewed force. And Elias was left questioning how long he could hold on to hope when the thin veil between reflection and reality threatened to tear apart entirely. The mirror's depths pulsed with dread, a silent promise that the next chapter of this nightmare was only just beginning. The candlelight flickered weakly against the peeling wallpaper of Elias' study, casting trembling shadows that danced like restless spirits across the cluttered desk. Stacks of notebooks, each scrawled with an obsessive frenzy of names, dates, and cryptic observations, lay scattered amid the detritus of a man unraveling. Elias sat hunched over, fingers trembling as they traced the jagged lines of his latest entry, a record of the mirror's latest reflection and the death it had foretold. His eyes, rimmed red and glassy from countless sleepless nights, darted back and forth between the faded pages and the ornate mirror standing ominously across the room. The glass held a terrible promise, a sinister riddle wrapped in shifting reflections that no longer showed his own face, but those of the next destined victims. Each image was a ghostly prelude to death, a silent scream trapped beneath the skin of the mirror. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on Elias like a physical force, suffocating and unrelenting. He had once believed that understanding the mirror's secret would grant him power, perhaps even a way to alter fate. But now, the truth gnawed at him. The knowledge itself was a curse, a double-edged blade that cut deeper with every revelation. Foreknowledge had become a prison. Each glimpse of a future death, a nail sealing shut the coffin of hope. A sudden knock shattered the silence, and Mara Voss stepped cautiously into the room. Her sharp eyes flicked over the chaos, taking in Elias's gaunt figure and the haunted expression etched deep into his face. "Elias," she said softly, closing the door behind her, "you can't keep doing this to yourself. The mirror is not just a window, it's a trap." He looked up, his voice hoarse. "But if I don't watch, if I don't know, people die without warning. I have to try." Mara shook her head, stepping closer. "Knowledge isn't always salvation. Sometimes it's just another form of torment. You are drowning in dread, Elias. You need to find a way to breathe." Thunder rolled in the distance, a low rumble that grew into a violent storm. Rain began to lash against the window panes, the sound like a drumbeat of impending doom. Elias's gaze drifted back to the mirror, its surface rippling unnaturally, shadows gathering beneath the glass as if alive. The cursed entity that lurked within was not just a passive observer. It fed on fear, on the very essence of human terror. "Do you think there's a way out?" Elias whispered, more to himself than to Mara. "Or am I just prolonging the inevitable?" Mara's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "That's the question, isn't it? But giving up means letting the curse win. You have to decide whether to fight or surrender." Elias closed his eyes, a sharp intake of breath escaping as he battled the whirlwind of emotions inside him. The dread was a living thing, crawling beneath his skin, whispering of despair and futility. Yet beneath it all flickered a fragile ember of defiance, a stubborn refusal to be consumed entirely. The mirror's surface shimmered, a distorted visage emerging briefly before melting away into darkness. Elias felt the thin veil between reflection and reality blur once more, the line growing ever more tenuous. The price of knowledge was steep, and the cost might be his very soul. As the storm raged on, Elias opened his eyes, the fight within rekindled. He would face the curse again, knowing full well the dangers that awaited. But in this moment of harrowing clarity, he understood that the true battle was not just against the mirror's dark power, but against the corrosive fear that threatened to consume him from within. The night stretched ahead, heavy with uncertainty and shadows. Outside, the rain whispered secrets against the glass, and the mirror waited, patient and unyielding. Elias's journey was far from over, and the price of knowledge still hung in the balance, a haunting question that would follow him into the depths of his own reflection. And somewhere beneath the skin of the mirror, the curse pulsed, hungry for the next flicker of dread. The candle sputtered, its flame wavering as Elias rose unsteadily from his chair. The room seemed to close in around him, the walls pressing tighter with every breath. Mara watched silently, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. "We can't let this break you," she said firmly. "There has to be a way to reclaim your mind from the mirror's grasp." Elias shook his head, voice barely audible. "I'm not sure it's possible. Every truth I uncover just pulls me deeper into a darkness I can't escape." Mara stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him in the moment. "Then we find another way, not by fighting the shadows alone, but by understanding them, together." He looked into her eyes, searching for hope, and found a fragile lifeline. "Together," he echoed, the word a whisper barely breaking the storm's howl outside. The mirror gleamed in the corner, its depths unfathomable. The battle for Elias's soul was far from over, but for the first time in many nights, the dread was tempered by a glimmer of resolve. The price of knowledge was high, but surrender was not yet the answer. In the silence that followed, the mirror waited patiently, its surface calm, belying the terrible secrets beneath. And in the fragile flicker of candlelight, Elias prepared to face the darkness once more. The air in the cramped antique shop grew colder, heavier, as Elias Marlowe stood motionless before the ornate mirror that had become the axis of his very existence. The glass, once a simple reflective surface, now writhed with shadow and whispers, faces swirling like a living mosaic of death, each visage a harbinger of inevitable fate. Elias's breath came shallow and rapid, a storm of dread twisting deep within his chest. He reached out, fingers trembling, but the cold glass seemed to ripple beneath his touch, as if recoiling from him. Behind him, Mara Voss clutched an ancient tome, the vellum pages brittle but filled with cryptic incantations she had painstakingly uncovered. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering despite the shadows flickering in the candlelight, met Elias's in a silent plea. "This is the moment," she whispered, voice barely audible over the low hum that now filled the room. "The mirror demands its price. You must decide sacrifice or surrender." Elias swallowed hard, the weight of the curse pressing down on him like a physical force. Every reflection he had seen, friends, strangers, foes, each face had died as foretold, their fates sealed in the mirror's merciless gaze. And now, the mirror's reflection shifted, coalescing into a horrifying certainty, his own face, cracked and hollow-eyed, staring back with a despair that mirrored his own. A low, guttural whisper slithered from the mirror's depths, the manifested entity making its presence known. The shadows beneath the glass writhed into a figure formless, yet menacing, its presence a suffocating reminder of the inescapable truth beneath appearances. Elias's heart pounded like a drumbeat of doom as the room seemed to bend, reality twisting at the mirror's command. "You cannot escape what you have seen, Elias," the voice echoed in his mind, cold and relentless. "Life and death are but reflections beneath the skin of the mirror. Choose or be consumed." Mara began the ritual, her voice steady despite the fear that danced in her eyes. The candles flickered wildly, shadows crawling like living things along the walls, responding to her ancient words. Elias felt the air thicken, the very fabric of the room pulsing with dark energy that threatened to unravel his sanity. Memories surged unbidden, his friend lost to an unexplained death. The faces of those he had helplessly watched meet their end. His own isolation and obsession with the cursed mirror. The choice before him was stark: surrender to the mirror's demand and become another doomed reflection, or sacrifice himself to sever the curse, risking everything for a chance at salvation. His fingers clenched into fists, nails digging into pale flesh as the mirror's surface shimmered violently. The distorted reflection of himself seemed to plead and accuse simultaneously, a fractured self trapped beneath the glass, waiting for release or destruction. With a final shuddering breath, Elias stepped forward, voice breaking but resolute. "I choose to end this. Not for myself alone, but for all who have suffered because of this cursed thing." A blinding flash erupted from the mirror, shards of glass raining down like frozen tears, each fragment catching the flickering candlelight in prismatic bursts. The antique shop trembled violently, the very walls groaning under the strain of the unleashed power. Then, as suddenly as it began, the tumult ceased. An eerie silence settled, thick and pregnant with uncertain fate. Elias collapsed to his knees, chest heaving as the cold stillness pressed in. Mara knelt beside him, her hand warm on his shoulder, eyes searching his face for any sign of hope or despair. The mirror stood silent, its glass once again smooth and unyielding, reflecting only the dim light of the room. Outside, shadows lengthened as night deepened, and the fragile line between reflection and reality shimmered faintly, waiting, watching, the curse not entirely broken, the story not yet finished. Elias's choice had been made, but the price was yet to be revealed. As Mara whispered words of comfort, the shattered fragments of the past lingered in the air, and a single question haunted the silent shop. Had he truly escaped the mirror's grasp, or merely delayed the inevitable? The night stretched on, and beneath the skin of the mirror, dread waited patiently for its next reflection. The heavy silence within the antique shop was almost tangible, pressing against Mara Voss and Detective Rowan as they stood amidst the shelves crowded with mirrors of every shape and size. The air was thick with the musty scent of aged wood and the faint metallic tang that seemed to seep from the glass itself, a remnant of the dark history etched into every reflection. For a long moment neither spoke. Their eyes roamed the room, catching fragmented images in the mirrors' faces that once were, shadows of moments steeped in horror and inevitability. Mara's breath caught as she noticed a faint shimmer ripple across the surface of the largest mirror, the ornate frame twisted with curling vines and strange symbols. It was as if the glass was alive, breathing softly beneath the layers of dust and time. The dread that had clung to her throughout this ordeal stirred Inu, a chilling reminder that the events that had unfolded were far from over. "Has gone," Mara finally whispered, her voice barely audible, laden with exhaustion and disbelief. "Elias, I think the curse is broken. Or at least, he's not trapped in that nightmare anymore." Detective Rowan shifted his weight, eyes narrowing as he considered her words. "Or maybe he's just no longer with us," he said cautiously, the skepticism that had defined his approach warring with the impossible truths he had witnessed. "The mirror's curse, it's a cycle. It feeds on fear and fate. If Elias escaped, how? And if he didn't, what does that mean for the rest of us? Mara swallowed hard, folding a leather-bound journal closed. The pages were filled with Elias's meticulous notes, frantic sketches of faces, dates, and cryptic observations. His obsession, his terror, his relentless pursuit of understanding were all laid bare in those worn pages. Her fingers trembled as she traced the worn leather, the weight of his burden settling heavily upon her. A sudden movement caught their attention. In the shadowed doorway, Lydia Crane appeared, her presence as unsettling as ever. Cloaked in dim light, her eyes gleamed with an unnerving knowing, a cryptic smile playing at the corners of her lips. She said nothing, merely regarded them with a quiet intensity that spoke volumes. Without a word, Lydia turned and vanished deeper into the labyrinth of mirrors, leaving behind a lingering sense of unease. The shop was far from silent now. Whispers seemed to echo faintly from the glass, flickers of distorted reflections dancing just beyond clear sight. Rowan's voice broke the spell. She's like a guardian of this place, or maybe something more. Mara nodded slowly. The mirrors aren't just objects. They were vessels, traps for fate itself. And the shop, it's a prison and a gateway. Elias was caught in between. Outside, the city moved on as if untouched by the horrors contained within the shop's walls. The grey sky loomed heavy, the distant murmur of traffic a dull hum beneath the oppressive quiet of the antique store. Yet inside, the mirrors shimmered faintly, each surface alive with the promise of secrets yet to be revealed, of futures yet to be claimed. Mara closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe deeply. The dread that had shadowed her since the beginning still lingered, a cold hand on her spine. But beneath it, there was a fragile ember of hope, or perhaps just a desperate resolve to face whatever came next. "We have to keep watch," she said, glancing at Rowan. "If this is truly over, we can't let it rise again unnoticed." Rowan nodded, the weight of the task settling over him. "And if it isn't? Then we prepare for the next reflection, the next victim." The mirrors around them caught the fading light, their surfaces alive with silent promise. The antique shop waited patiently, a sentinel of dread and inevitability, its cursed legacy hanging like a thin veil between reflection and reality. As Mara and Detective Rowan stepped out into the chill of the evening, the door closed softly behind them, leaving the shop and its deadly secrets waiting in the shadows. Inside, the mirrors remained still, yet somehow their depths stirred. A faint pulse, a whisper of movement beneath the glass, hinted that the cycle was far from broken. The curse endured, waiting for the next curious soul to peer beneath the skin of the mirror and glimpse the terrifying truth that lay beneath. Outside, the city lights flickered on, oblivious. Yet beneath the surface of normalcy, the fragile line between knowledge and doom shimmered faintly, a warning etched in glass and shadow. And somewhere, in the silent heart of the antique shop, fate waited patiently for its next reflection. The air inside the antique shop was thick with silence, a heavy stillness that pressed against Mara Voss and Detective Rowan as they stood amid the countless mirrors lining the walls. Each pane of glass reflected fragments of the room, fractured images that seemed to ripple with an unseen life. The fading light from the overcast sky outside filtered weakly through the grimy windows, casting ghostly patterns across the worn wooden floorboards. Mara's eyes lingered on the ornate mirror that had once belonged to Elias Marlowe. Its surface was dark and restless, a subtle shimmer coursing beneath the glass like a pulse. She reached out instinctively, fingers brushing the cold frame, feeling a shiver crawl up her spine. "It's still here," she whispered, voice barely carrying in the oppressive quiet. Detective Rowan nodded, his usually stoic face etched with an uncharacteristic wariness. "The curse didn't end with Elias," he said flatly. "Whatever power this mirror holds, it's not bound to any one person. It waits." The shopkeeper, Lydia Crane, watched from the shadows near the back of the room, her expression unreadable. Draped in layers of vintage garments, her eyes gleamed with a cryptic knowledge, as if she bore witness to centuries of secrets. Mara glanced toward her, sensing the weight of unspoken truths hanging heavy in the air. He tried, Mara murmured, recalling Elias' desperate battle against the mirror's malevolent will. He fought to break the cycle, to escape the fate the mirror imposed. But in the end, Detective Rowan sighed, running a hand through his hair. The mirror demands a price. Whether he paid it or was consumed by it, the outcome is the same. The reflections remain. Their footsteps echoed softly as they moved toward the cursed mirror, the air growing colder with each step. Mara pulled a faded cloth from her satchel, holding it over the glass with trembling hands. The mirror's surface rippled beneath the fabric, as if resisting the shroud, a faint murmur like a distant sigh threading through the room. "Covering it won't stop it," Rowan said quietly. "But maybe it'll buy us time, the cruelest illusion of all." Mara's gaze drifted to the windows, where the street beyond lay deserted, cloaked in a misty grey embrace. Then, from the shadows, a lone figure emerged, drawn inexorably toward the shop's door. Something about the way the figure hesitated before stepping inside chilled Mara to her core. The shop's interior seemed to pulse with anticipation, the mirrors reflecting not the present, but the inevitable. The thin veil between reflection and reality shimmered with a dreadful promise. The cycle was far from over. Mara swallowed hard, the weight of foreknowledge settling like a stone in her chest. "We can't stop this," she whispered, "but perhaps we can prepare for what's to come." Detective Rowan's eyes met hers, a flicker of resolve igniting within the shadow of despair. Then we watch, we remember, and we wait for the next reflection to show itself. Outside, the antique shop stood silent, a beacon of dark curiosity on a forgotten street. Its mirrors gleamed faintly, each a silent sentinel guarding the thin line where life and death converged. And beneath the skin of the mirror, the curse whispered on waiting, watching, reflecting the dread and inevitability of all who dared to look deeper. The door creaked open, and the delicate dance of reflections resumed, inviting the next soul to peer beneath the surface and confront the chilling truth that lies beneath the skin of the mirror.